Case 1, Stephany E. LaFountain, the murders of two innocent children. On November 20th, 2017, in Fairbanks, Alaska, Stephany E. LaFountain, later known as Stephany Bilecki, made a chilling 911 call. Her 13-month-old daughter, Jasmine, was unresponsive. Her voice, however, carried an eerie calmness, absent of panic or urgency. Family members who arrived before emergency responders rushed to administer CPR, but their desperate attempts were in vain. Jasmine was rushed to the hospital, but after 4 agonizing days, doctors delivered the heart-wrenching news. The infant had died from a lack of oxygen. What the family did not know at that moment was that this was not an isolated tragedy. 2 years earlier, in September 2015, LaFountain's 4-month-old daughter, Cheyenne, had died under nearly identical, suspicious circumstances. The pain from the second loss would soon force investigators to revisit the first, leading them down a dark and disturbing path. Stephany LaFountain's life, from the outside, appeared like one of a young woman struggling with the weight of motherhood. Married to a soldier stationed at Fort Wainwright, she endured instability, divorce, and isolation. Cheyenne and Jasmine were both healthy, vibrant infants, adored by their fathers and extended family. Theirs were the kind of lives full of promise until they were abruptly taken. Cheyenne's death in 2015 was initially labeled undetermined, leaving a lingering but unspoken suspicion that something wasn't right. The tragedy of Jasmine's death in 2017 seemed like a random, incomprehensible loss until the connections began to emerge, revealing an unthinkable truth that would change everything. In the wake of Jasmine's death, investigators began to connect the dots. The similarity in the circumstances surrounding both deaths, 2 healthy infants dying without explanation, compelled law enforcement to revisit the 2015 case. Autopsy results revealed that both children had died from suffocation. This medical evidence, while damning, was only part of the story. The crucial breakthrough came when authorities turned their attention to a place often overlooked: Stephany LaFountain's phone. It was there, in the most intimate corner of her life, that the chilling evidence of premeditation was found. Detectives analyzed LaFountain's internet search history, uncovering a series of disturbing queries. Just 1 hour before calling 911 for her daughter Jasmine, LaFountain had searched for ways to suffocate, how to kill a human with no proof, 16 steps to kill someone and not get caught. The evidence was clear. These were not the actions of a grieving mother in a tragic accident. This was a cold, calculated plan. LaFountain's role in her children's deaths was no longer a question. It was a fact. On August 29, 2018, following a thorough investigation, LaFountain was indicted on multiple counts of murder. The arrest came months after Jasmine's death and years after Cheyenne's, but the investigation had slowly but surely connected the pieces. When confronted with the evidence, LaFountain initially denied any involvement, but the digital trail she had left behind, meticulously documented searches for murder methods, made it impossible for her to hide the truth. The case would stretch over the next several years, delayed by legal maneuvering, but by August 2024, LaFountain, now known by her married name Bilecki, finally agreed to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. The prosecution presented a damning case built around the chilling paper trail of her internet searches. In exchange for the plea, LaFountain avoided a lengthy trial, but the justice she faced would be no less severe. In December 2024, the sentencing took place. Judge Patricia Haynes presided over the emotional proceedings. Bilecki was handed a composite sentence of 130 years, with 85 years suspended, leaving her with 45 years to serve. The judge emphasized that the sentence would serve as both a form of justice for the victims and a warning to the community about the consequences of such heinous acts. The fathers of both children delivered emotional victim impact statements, their voices thick with grief as they recounted the precious lives lost. For them, no sentence would ever feel like enough. but it was justice, a necessary closure in the face of such unbearable pain. Today, Stephany Elizabeth Bilecki is incarcerated in an Alaskan correctional facility, serving her 45-year sentence. Given her age, it is effectively a life sentence. There have been no known appeals since her plea, and she remains behind bars, having robbed the world of 2 innocent lives. The aftermath of this case has left deep scars, not just for the family and community, but for the wider conversation about the hidden dangers of emotional distress, isolation, and untreated mental health struggles. The murders of Kyan and Jasmine have haunted Fairbanks, Alaska, serving as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most profound danger does not come from strangers, but from the ones who are supposed to protect us the most. Their names are etched in the hearts of those who loved them, and their story serves as a painful cautionary tale about the unimaginable darkness that can reside in even the most seemingly ordinary lives. Case 2. The Kettlebell Murder, Cedar May Sarten. On October 14, 2024, the calm of Fairbanks, Alaska, was shattered by a 911 call that would mark the beginning of a chilling and tragic tale. Cedar May Sarten, 43, dialed in distress, claiming her 5-year-old son, Robert Bodie Gonner Sarten, had been harmed. When police arrived at the 10th Avenue apartment, they found Sarten covered in severe self-inflicted cuts, but the real horror awaited inside the apartment. There, on a bed, was Bodie, dead. The crime scene was drenched in blood, and the apartment reeked of violence. A short while later, Bodie's father received a voicemail from Sarten that would forever haunt him. The words, cold and devoid of emotion, rang out through the phone. "We don't have a son no more." The finality of her words, the bluntness of the message, served as a devastating echo of the life his son had lost. For the murder, Cedar May Sarten had been known to struggle with emotional instability, her history marked by past police contact. A troubling incident from July 2020 had already raised alarms. Sarten had been observed by a police officer attempting to harm her son, Bodie, who was just 16 months old at the time. While Bodie was described by those who loved him as the sweetest, most kind-hearted, loving little boy, the depths of his mother's despair were a hidden undercurrent, only revealed too late. Despite the struggles, no one could have predicted that this young child's life would be violently taken by the one person who should have protected him. The discovery of the crime and the circumstances surrounding it quickly led investigators to turn their attention to Sarten. There were no signs of forced entry into the apartment, which meant the violence had come from someone inside. Sarten's self-inflicted wounds only deepened the suspicion. Inside the apartment, detectives found a 20-pound kettlebell weight and several knives, all stained with Bodie's blood. Further investigation revealed that Sarten had made a false claim about trying to call 911 the previous night. Phone records disproved this. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but it wasn't until the autopsy results came back that the full horror of the crime would be confirmed. The autopsy confirmed that Bodie had died from blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted by the 20-pound kettlebell. His injuries were compounded by additional wounds from a sharp object, likely one of the knives found at the scene. This was not an isolated act of anger, but a sustained and brutal assault on a defenseless child. The evidence pointed to one person, Cedar May Sarten. The brutality and premeditation were clear. Sarten was the sole person responsible for the death of her son. After being hospitalized for her self-inflicted injuries, Sarten was arrested on November 5, 2024, and charged with first-degree murder. As she was treated in a medical facility in Seattle, Washington, an arrest warrant was issued. When questioned about the crime, Sarten remained largely uncooperative, offering little in the way of explanation. Her lack of remorse, combined with the damning evidence of premeditation, left no room for doubt about her role in her son's death. The case has not yet gone to trial, but Cedar May Sarten has been formally charged with first-degree murder and has pleaded not guilty to the charges. The prosecution's case will be based on the physical evidence recovered from the crime scene, including the kettlebell and the blood-stained knives. They will also present the chilling voicemail Sarten left for Bodie's father, which has become one of the key pieces of evidence. The trial, still in the pre-trial phase, is expected to be emotionally charged, with the prosecution planning to emphasize the brutal nature of the crime and the coldness of Sarten's actions. At this point, Cedar Sarten is still awaiting trial, and the community, still reeling from the brutality of the crime, waits for justice. The name of the judge who will preside over the case is not yet available, but one thing remains certain. The tragic loss of Bodie has left a deep wound in the community, one that will be felt for years to come. The innocent child who once brought joy to those around him now serves as a symbol of the vulnerability of children in a world where they should have been safe. The aftermath of this case has reverberated through the Fairbanks community. The murder of Robert Bodie Gonner Sarten has forced a reckoning with the hidden dangers that lie within homes, where a mother, supposed to be the ultimate protector, becomes the perpetrator of unimaginable violence. The case highlights the need for greater awareness and intervention for those struggling with emotional and mental health issues. The impact of this crime is far-reaching, and the loss of Bodie serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of untreated psychological distress. His death, senseless and brutal, has left an indelible mark on those who loved him, and his name will forever be a symbol of the life that was taken far too soon. Case 3, the murder of Heather Alexie. On Friday morning, February 7, 2025, Fairbanks, Alaska, woke to a tragedy that shattered its calm. A welfare check led a concerned client of 36-year-old Heather Alexie to her apartment after days of silence. Inside, they discovered 6-year-old Peter Alexie dead, his small body lifeless in a home meant to protect him. Police rushed to the scene, and what began as a welfare call turned into a homicide investigation. Heather and her 5-year-old daughter, Renee, were missing, sparking a frantic statewide search filled with dread and disbelief. Peter was a bright, gentle boy whose laughter filled every room. To those who knew him, he was pure joy, curious, kind, and innocent. Police Chief Ron Dupuy called his death incredibly tragic and heartbreaking, a sentiment shared by everyone in the tight-knit community. Yet behind that heartbreak was a darker truth: his mother's long struggle with mental illness. Heather had battled depression and hallucinations, but in the months before the tragedy, she had stopped taking her medication. Those around her saw her unravel, never imagining her instability would lead to this unimaginable loss. Police immediately began searching for Heather and Renee. Using cell phone data, investigators tracked Heather near Anchorage, hundreds of miles from Fairbanks. Working with Anchorage police, they located her and found Renee alive and unharmed. Relief swept through the community, but it came too late for Peter. During interrogation, Heather confessed in a disturbingly calm voice. She admitted to inflicting injuries on her son, saying she had shaken and fought him during a breakdown. The autopsy confirmed what detectives already knew. Peter had been murdered by his own mother. There were no accomplices, only a mother consumed by her deteriorating mind. Heather Alexie was arrested on charges of second-degree murder. Her demeanor remained cold and detached, showing no remorse. The following days brought heartbreak to Fairbanks as residents struggled to process what had happened. In court, Heather pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors presented her confession and forensic evidence as the case moved toward trial. As of late 2025, Heather remains incarcerated awaiting trial. Her surviving daughter, Renee, is in state custody, shielded from further trauma. Peter's death left an open wound in Fairbanks, a reminder of the devastating consequences when mental health struggles go untreated. His story is one of innocence lost, warning of the urgent need for stronger mental health support and intervention. It's a tragedy that asks a painful question: how many lives must be lost before help arrives in time? Case 4. The murder of Job Christensen. On November 20th, 2020 in Anchorage, Alaska, A chain of disturbing events began at a quiet neighborhood gas station. Police were called to check on a woman found asleep in her truck. That woman was 32-year-old Marque. What started as a welfare check quickly spiraled into chaos when Marley awoke, brandished a large knife, and threatened the responding officers. She was arrested on assault charges, but at that time, no one realized this encounter was only the beginning of a far darker tragedy waiting to be uncovered. 5 days later, on November 25, 2020, family members contacted police after losing all communication with Marley and her 5-year-old son, Job Christensen. Concern turned to panic as calls went unanswered. When officers arrived at Marley's home, they forced entry, and what they found inside would haunt them forever. Little Job was discovered dead, lying still in his home, the victim of fatal knife wounds to his neck and throat. The brutality of the scene left even seasoned detectives shaken. What had once been a safe space for a child had become the site of unimaginable horror. Job was only 5 years old. Innocent, curious, and full of life. He was the kind of child who loved to make others laugh, a boy with his whole future ahead of him. To his grandparents, he was their light, their joy, and their reason to keep believing in goodness. His death shattered their world. For investigators, the evidence quickly pointed to one person: his own mother, Marley. The same woman arrested days earlier for threatening officers now stood accused of the most unthinkable crime, a mother's hand taking the life of her child. Marley's violent arrest, just days before Job's body was discovered, became the crucial link in the investigation. Detectives from the Anchorage Police Department's homicide unit pieced together a chilling timeline. The physical evidence tied Marley directly to the murder scene, with no indication of any other suspect. She was soon served with a felony warrant for first-degree murder, while still in custody on her previous assault charges. What emerged in court documents was a portrait of a woman in severe mental and emotional crisis, whose instability had spiraled into catastrophic violence. The case moved slowly but firmly toward justice. In 2023, Marley Marque's trial began, lasting 5 intense weeks. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, the sequence of her violent behavior, and the medical examiner's detailed report describing Job's fatal wounds. The defense offered little that could justify or explain her actions. The jury deliberated carefully, but the outcome was clear. On October 24, 2023, Marley Marque was found guilty of first-degree murder and guilty on the related assault charges against police officers. During sentencing on February 29, 2024, Judge Peter Ramgren delivered his ruling with measured gravity. He sentenced Marley to 80 years in prison, with 30 years suspended, leaving 50 years to serve. In his statement, Judge Ramgren called the sentence not only a punishment, but also a reflection of society's condemnation of violence against the most vulnerable. The court fell silent as Job's grandparents gave their victim impact statements, voices trembling, hearts broken, yet determined to make sure their grandson's name was never forgotten. Today, Marley Marque remains behind bars in an Alaskan correctional facility. At her age, the 50-year sentence ensures she will likely spend the rest of her life in prison. The murder of 5-year-old Job Christensen stands as one of the most painful cases Anchorage has ever witnessed. It is a haunting reminder of how untreated mental illness, left unchecked, can destroy lives and families in moments of darkness. For the community, the name Job represents more than tragedy. It represents a call to protect the innocent, to listen before it's too late, and to recognize that behind every quiet cry for help may lie a storm we cannot see. Case 5, the murder of Pepper Christensen, Anchorage, Alaska, 2011. On August 5, 2011, Anchorage, Alaska awoke to a tragedy that defied understanding. 33-year-old Sarah Bentley Johnson had suffocated her 3-week-old daughter, Pepper, in an act that would later be described in court as soul-crushing infanticide. At first, Sarah told authorities that her baby had simply stopped breathing in her sleep. To those who heard her story, it sounded like a heartbreaking case of sudden infant death. But investigators soon realized something was terribly wrong. As detectives pieced together the evidence, the truth began to surface. Sarah later confessed to her family that she had been overwhelmed and emotionally broken since Pepper's birth. The pressures of new motherhood, combined with what would later be identified as severe postpartum psychosis, had pushed her beyond the edge. Behind her quiet demeanor lay a horrifying reality. She had used a plastic bag to end her infant's life. The image of a mother harming the child she had brought into the world shook the entire community. Pepper was only 3 weeks old, fragile, innocent, and completely dependent on her mother's care. She had never known the world beyond the warmth of her home, and yet that home became the place where her short life was stolen. Her death sent ripples of disbelief through Anchorage, leaving family members in unbearable grief. What they had first believed was a tragic accident was, in truth, an act of deliberate suffocation. The defense would later argue that Sarah's mental illness impaired her understanding of right and wrong. They described a woman spiraling under the weight of postpartum psychosis, consumed by fear and confusion. The prosecution, however, focused on intent, the deliberate act of placing a plastic bag over her baby's face. The autopsy confirmed suffocation as the cause of death, and Sarah's confession aligned with the medical findings. Sarah Bentley Johnson was arrested just days after Pepper's death and charged with first-degree murder. The trial, delayed for years, became a clash between compassion and accountability. On December 15, 2015, the jury rejected the argument of diminished responsibility and found her guilty of first-degree murder. In June 2016, Judge Philip R. Volland handed down his sentence, 40 years in prison with 20 years suspended, leaving 20 years to serve. His words cut through the courtroom silence as he described the killing as soul-crushing infanticide, a crime that represented the ultimate violation of maternal trust. It was a sentence meant not only to punish, but to remind society of the need to protect its most vulnerable. Today, Sarah Bentley Johnson remains behind bars in an Alaskan correctional facility, serving her 20-year sentence. Her conviction stands, and Pepper's family continues to live with the ache of a loss that can never be undone. The death of baby Pepper Christensen is a sobering reminder of the thin line between mental illness and irreversible tragedy. It underscores the desperate need for stronger mental health intervention, particularly for mothers facing postpartum crises. Pepper's short life, though brief, carries a lasting message, one that calls for awareness, empathy, and the urgency to reach out before it's too late. Case 6. The Abandoned Newborn, Ashley Ard/Brown. On October 14, 2013, in Anchorage, Alaska, the air was sharp and cold, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. Beneath a cluster of heavy brush near Turner Park, behind a transformer close to Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, a newborn baby girl lay wrapped in a towel. Her tiny cries pierced the stillness of the night. Moments later, a passerby walking their dog stopped when the animal began to pull toward the sound. What the dog's owner discovered would forever haunt the community. The newborn, only hours old, had been left alone in the freezing Alaskan night. Despite the desperate efforts of first responders, the infant, later named Parker by the courts, succumbed to hypothermia and exposure before the night was over. The mother who abandoned her was a 24-year-old U.S. Army specialist, Ashley Ard, later known as Ashley Brown, who had concealed her pregnancy from her husband, her military unit, and even her closest friends. Ashley Ard had been living under immense secrecy. A soldier stationed at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, she had hidden her pregnancy from nearly everyone in her life. Her husband was deployed at the time, unaware of the truth. Crucially, the defense later revealed the context of her fear. Ard claimed she was driven to conceal the pregnancy because her husband had threatened to kill her if she became pregnant by someone else, and she believed the threat. Ard delivered her baby in the solitude of her home bathtub, alone, frightened, and overwhelmed. Instead of seeking medical care or invoking Alaska's safe haven law, Ashley made a fatal choice. She wrapped her newborn in a towel, placed her in her vehicle, and drove into the cold Alaskan night. She stopped in the dark seclusion of Turner Park, laid the baby behind a transformer, and left her there to die. The next morning, a dog walker heard faint crying and followed the sound to the thick brush behind the transformer. The baby was discovered cold, barely alive, and wrapped in the thin towel her mother had left her in. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but the infant could not be revived. The coroner later determined that Parker died from exposure and hypothermia. Within hours, investigators began piecing together what had happened. Blood evidence at the scene and subsequent hospital record comparisons identified Ashley Ard as the mother. Detectives learned that she had given birth in her bathtub, cleaned herself and the newborn, and then concealed her actions under layers of lies. The Anchorage Police Department launched a detailed investigation into Ard's mental state and intent. Ard's calculated decision to drive to a remote location in the dead of night and leave her infant exposed to near freezing temperatures became central to the prosecution's case. Prosecutors argued that this decision showed a clear, extreme indifference to human life. In the weeks following the baby's death, Ashley Ard was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. During her interrogation, she initially denied being pregnant or giving birth. As the evidence mounted, her lies began to crumble. Her concealment, her deliberate actions, and her failure to seek help built a narrative of willful abandonment rather than panic or confusion. As the case moved through the courts, Ard's defense argued that she had acted under emotional distress, emphasizing that her extreme fear of her husband's potential violence was the catalyst for the concealment and the abandonment, but the prosecution countered that her subsequent behavior, delivering the baby, cleaning up, driving to a secluded location, and leaving her child to die, was deliberate and conscious. The deliberate nature of her choices, despite the emotional context, was undeniable. In 2017, Ard accepted a plea deal. Her charge was reduced from first-degree murder to manslaughter, and she pleaded guilty. During her sentencing hearing in February 2018, Anchorage Superior Court Judge Kevin Saxby presided. RD stood visibly emotional, stating that she never intended for Parker to die. Judge Saxby agreed with the prosecution that there were literally dozens of places where RD could have safely surrendered her baby. He called her conduct a reflection of extreme indifference and sentenced Ashley Ard to 12 years in prison, with 3 years suspended, leaving 9 years to serve, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. He emphasized that her actions had not been a momentary lapse in judgment, but a series of deliberate decisions that ended a defenseless life. The conviction and resulting incarceration for a felony offense terminated her U.S. Army service. The public and media dubbed her the most hated woman in Alaska, a title that underscores the depth of betrayal felt by a society that values both motherhood and the duty to protect. The military community that once called her one of their own now remembers her only for the cruelty of her actions. The death of newborn Parker became more than a criminal case. It became a call to action. The tragedy reignited awareness of Alaska's safe haven law, reminding parents that no matter how desperate or afraid they are, there are safe and compassionate options available. Parker's story continues to echo across Alaska, serving as both a lesson and a warning. Her memory remains a haunting reminder that compassion and awareness can save lives. In Alaska, the bitter wind of that October night still carries her name, Parker, the child who was found too late, but whose story will never be forgotten. Case 7, the stabbing of a 3-year-old son, Tracia Jordan-Sainte. In 2014, inside a transitional housing center for homeless families in East Anchorage, Alaska, staff members made a horrifying discovery that would stay with them for life. On the floor of one of the small residential units lay a 3-year-old boy covered in blood. He had been stabbed in the neck with a pair of scissors. The attacker was not a stranger, not an intruder, but his own mother, Tracia Jordan-Sainte, then 42 years old. Staff immediately called 911, and the boy was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The scene inside that room, a blood-stained floor, a pair of scissors, and a terrified, bleeding child, was almost too much for even seasoned first responders to bear. What had begun as another quiet day at a center meant to offer protection and shelter had turned into a nightmare of violence and betrayal. Tracia Jordan-Sainte was a mother living on the edge. She had been struggling with severe mental illness, diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, a condition now known as bipolar disorder. Those close to her later revealed that she had recently stopped taking her prescribed medication, a decision that would have catastrophic consequences. Living in transitional housing, Jordan-Sainte was already vulnerable, balancing poverty, instability, and her declining mental health. The combination proved deadly. Without treatment, her mental state spiraled out of control, and in a moment of psychotic disconnection, she turned on the one person who loved and depended on her most, her son. The crime was discovered by staff members at the housing facility, who responded to sounds of distress coming from her unit. When they entered, they were confronted with an unthinkable scene. The young child lying on the ground, bleeding heavily from a deep wound to the neck caused by a pair of household scissors. Paramedics transported the boy to a nearby hospital, where doctors fought to save his life. Miraculously, he survived the attack, though his injuries were severe. The emotional scars, however, would take much longer to heal. The Anchorage Police Department launched an immediate investigation, focusing on the motive and the mother's state of mind. Detectives learned that Jordan-Sainte had stopped taking her medication and had been exhibiting signs of severe mental distress in the days leading up to the attack. The charge was filed as attempted murder, reflecting the sheer brutality of the act and the deliberate use of a weapon against a defenseless child. Tracia Jordan-Sainte was arrested soon after the attack. She told officers that she was not in her right mind at the time of the stabbing and later expressed deep sorrow and remorse in court. In October 2015, Jordan-Sainte accepted a plea deal that reduced her charge from attempted murder to first-degree assault. The decision spared her a potentially much longer sentence, but still recognized the severity of the crime. On August 2016, Tracia Jordan-Sainte was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with 8 years suspended, leaving 7 years to serve. The judge noted that while her actions were the result of untreated mental illness, the violence of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim demanded accountability. The sentence was intended not only as punishment, but also as recognition of the need for continued mental health treatment. After serving her sentence, Tracia Jordan-Sainte was released from custody. Her son survived the attack and recovered physically from his wounds, though the emotional trauma of being attacked by his own mother left deep psychological scars. The case of Tracia Jordan-Sainte remains one of Alaska's most heartbreaking examples of the devastating intersection between mental illness and family violence. It underscores how fragile the line can be between crisis and catastrophe when mental health conditions go untreated. This tragedy, which could have been prevented with proper medical care, instead became a brutal reminder of the dangers of neglecting mental health. Case 8. The case of Jessica Beagley, Anchorage, Alaska, 2010. It began not with a police report, but with a camera. In October 2010, Anchorage resident Jessica Beagley, a 36-year-old mother, filmed herself punishing her 7-year-old adopted son. The footage she recorded, later submitted to the producers of the Dr. Phil show, captured a moment so disturbing it would shock viewers across the nation. In the video, Beagley forces her crying son to swallow spoonfuls of hot sauce as punishment for lying about misbehaving at school. Moments later, she drags him into the bathroom and forces him under a cold shower. His screams echo through the small room, while Beagley's voice remains stern, controlled, and unyielding. It was a scene meant to demonstrate her discipline. Instead, it became undeniable evidence of child abuse. Jessica and her husband, Gary Beagley, an Anchorage police officer, had adopted the boy and his twin brother from a Russian orphanage in 2008. The twins arrived with emotional and behavioral challenges common among institutionalized children, challenges later connected to reactive attachment disorder, a condition that makes it difficult for a child to form trust and emotional bonds. Jessica had long struggled to manage her son's defiance and lying, and by October 21, 2010, her frustration had reached a breaking point. But rather than seek professional help, she set up a camera, recruited her 10-year-old daughter to record, and prepared a bottle of hot sauce. The punishment that followed would define her in the public eye and would scar her family's name permanently. The world learned about the abuse not through the courts, but through television. Beagley sent the 8-minute clip to Dr. Phil for a segment called Mommy Confessions. Producers had asked participants to film themselves disciplining their children, but no one anticipated what Beagley would send. When the episode aired in November 2010, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Viewers were horrified. Across the U.S., calls poured into Anchorage authorities demanding justice. In Russia, the outrage was even greater. Some officials called for the twins to be returned to Russian custody, citing Beagley's actions as evidence of unfit parenting. Anchorage prosecutors launched an investigation. Prosecutor Cynthia Franklin described the act as deliberate, calculated, and cruel. The video itself became the centerpiece of the case. It showed clear planning: the hot sauce, the camera, the instructions to her daughter, the cold shower, all evidence that this was not a moment of lost control, but a conscious decision. The Office of Children's Services, OCS, reviewed the situation and, despite public fury, allowed the children to remain in the home under a structured safety plan and mandatory therapy. In early 2011, Jessica Beagley was arrested and charged with misdemeanor child abuse. The trial, held that August, drew national media attention. The courtroom played the video in full, a haunting display of humiliation and fear. Prosecutors argued that Beagley's intent was to get national attention rather than seek help for her child. The defense countered that she was a desperate mother trying to discipline a child with severe behavioral issues, not a criminal. On August 23, 2011, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of misdemeanor child abuse. Judge David Wallace presided over sentencing 6 days later. He described Beagley's actions as a premeditated, gratuitous act that went far beyond acceptable discipline. Yet he also recognized that her family needed stability, not financial hardship. On August 29, 2011, Judge Wallace sentenced her to 3 years of probation, a 180-day suspended jail sentence, and a $2,500 fine, which was also suspended. Jessica Beagley completed her probation without serving jail time. The case faded from headlines, but its impact lingered. It sparked international debate on parental discipline, adoption trauma, and the blurred ethics of turning private suffering into televised spectacle. It also exposed how cultural and psychological misunderstandings between adoptive parents and vulnerable children can lead to devastating consequences. Though the punishment was mild compared to the public outrage, the conviction itself sent a lasting message. Discipline that inflicts pain or humiliation crosses the line into abuse. What began as an attempt to justify her parenting choices on national television ended as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride, frustration, and misplaced control. The collection of these confirmed true crime cases, from the chilling digital trail of Stephany Bilecki to the calculated betrayal by Denali Bramer and the tragic spiral of Heather Alexie, reveals a painful truth. The most profound danger often resides not outside the home, but within the circle of care. These are not just isolated headlines. They are stories of unimaginable betrayal that demand our attention. The victims' names, Peter, Job, Cheyenne, and Jasmine, must never be forgotten. Their memory stands as a silent plea for awareness, understanding, and timely intervention. If these stories have resonated with you and you believe this awareness should reach others, please take a moment to join the conversation and be part of the change. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss future stories that shed light on these critical issues. Share your thoughts below, reflect on the cases, express empathy for the victims' families, and discuss how society can prevent tragedies like these in the future. By engaging, you help break the silence and give voice to those who can no longer speak. Thank you for watching and for standing on the side of truth, awareness, and remembrance.